If you're anything like me, you realize that this is the last year that the SEC will have divisions that make up the conference, but you don't really process the fact that this is the last year your team is going to be playing an SEC West slate. The typical lineup, the typical 7 teams, are no longer. You're not guaranteed to play them anymore unless you get slotted into maybe a pod or a protected rivalry or something like that. This division is done, and this is the last year of its existence. That's pretty crazy to think about when you sit down and process it, because right now we're all distracted by the fact that our teams are about to go out there and play their first game of the year next week. We're thinking about lineups, we're thinking about players, we're thinking about the strengths of opposing teams, and this SEC West is pretty wide open in my opinion right now. You have some teams that we assume are the upper echelon, but really in that middle tier, it's pretty wild and anything can happen. Even at the top of this conference division, I think a lot of things can move around. So I want to give a projection on how I think the SEC West shakes down in its final year of existence. It's been the best, if not the best, one of the top 3 divisions in all of college football as long as I can remember, at least for the last 15, 20 years. And it's going away. So we're going to do it, its honor, of giving it an official projection on the year. Now keep in mind, this is a projection. We haven't seen any of these teams play yet. The reason I like to do this is just to kind of measure how we look at the teams now versus how we look at them once we see them later in the year, and go back and see where I or we were wrong, right, see what we got right, see what we got wrong, and it's just for fun. So let's get right into it. Just keep that in mind. But if you like this content, if you like SEC football, especially if you're an Aggie, please consider subscribing to this channel. It helps me greatly. I put out multiple college football videos every week throughout the season, and we have a lot of fun chopping it up in the comments section and sometimes going back and forth with some bad blood. But it's all good. It's all fun. I don't care what team you support. Jump in, subscribe, and get in the comments section. It's a bloodbath in there sometimes. Oh, and then one new thing I'm doing, if you share this video on other platforms, my channel, anything that I put out, I will shout you out in my next video. And last video, we had a profile named Tibbers share this video onto an online forum. Much appreciated. Thank you, Tibbers. So let's get right into it. So I said this thing is pretty wide open, all things considered. If you look at these teams, almost every team had a shakeup in the coaching department. Obviously, Auburn had a full transition. Ole Miss with the new DC, Arkansas, both coordinators, Alabama, both coordinators, Texas A&M, Bobby Petrino, obviously. Mississippi State had a major shakeup with the unfortunate, sad news about one of college football's greatest characters in Mike Leach. The only team that really remains stable, and this permeates through their roster as well, is LSU. And I think that might be why so many people have them on top of their projected end-of-year SEC West standings and ultimately winning the West. It's because of that stability. But I think there's a lot of movement that could happen within this conference versus what people think. So let's jump right into my projected final standings. So to bottom out this conference, it's a team that I think is going through just too much change to really compete within this division this year. Although I think they're on a great track and a great trajectory to be back on top of the SEC world within the next 2-3 years, it's Auburn. I just think that there's too much change. This coaching staff doesn't have their players just yet. Their message hasn't fully permeated this locker room yet. The culture will take time to set in and take its place. But I think they're off to a great start. Obviously, Hugh Freeze going in there. They've gotten a bunch of high-profile transfers and recruits just in the short time that he's been there. But this conference is just really, really strong and well-balanced. I think they're going to have a tough time winning more than 6 or 7 games this year. I think they probably sweep their out-of-conference schedule, but that doesn't really help them within the conference. It may help them build momentum, but there's still just going to be way too many tough matchups for them on the year. So I have Auburn finishing last this year, but don't get too comfortable with that because they're going to be back pretty soon. The next team I have is Ole Miss, and this is where the madness begins because I think these next 3 or 4 teams could all finish in any particular order. I do have some inklings as to how it might shake down, which is why I have Ole Miss at the bottom here. I think Ole Miss is a good team. I think they'll probably go 4-4 in conference play, 3-5, and probably win all of their non-con games. That includes a matchup versus Tulane that's going to be very important to their season to start the year off. I just think that this defense is going to be too big of a concern to beat all of the upper echelon teams within this conference, it's not going to be easy for them to stop a lot of teams, especially with this secondary being pretty bad and losing so many players. I think Ole Miss finishes towards the bottom half of this SEC West lineup. And then next, I have the Arkansas Razorbacks. You know, they have a great backfield, a good offensive line, major question marks at receiver. This seems to be a running team, much like another team at the top of this top 7 that I'll get into in a second. I think you know what I'm getting at. This is going to be a running back, quarterback focused offense. On defense, they lose their 2 leading tacklers for the last 3, at least 2-3 years in Bumper Pool, and for the last year with Drew Sanders. Secondary was shaky last year. They lose more pieces there. I think this defense is also going to be pretty bad. But this offense could be pretty dang good with a solid backfield and a good O-line. KJ Jefferson, I think, is one of the most underappreciated players in all of college football. I think if he's on a pretty good team, like, say, an Ohio State, a Michigan, an Alabama, that he's a Heisman contender going into the season. I really like KJ Jefferson. I know he's not super consistent throwing the ball, but I think he's definitely good enough, especially on deep balls. Hopefully he has receivers to play pitch and catch with, but I think they're going to be running all over teams. I think they're middle of the pack in the West this year. They're going to surprise a couple of teams. I hope they don't beat my Aggies in Jerry World. It seems like they have a chance to do that almost every year, despite the talent discrepancies. Coming in at number 4, I have Mississippi State. I project them to finish on the top of this middle tier with a chance to bust into the upper echelon. I think that this team is going to overcome the hurdle of losing their head coach and having a major coaching shift. They were promoted from within for their head coach and their defensive coordinator. I think that they are more talented, more experienced than many people realize going into the year. Obviously, a 4-year starter, I believe, in Will Rogers coming into the year. That's a lot of experience at quarterback. He should be able to handle a coaching change better than most quarterbacks in college, given that he has such experience, given that he's an adult now. I think that helps them in that transition quite a bit. But they have weapons everywhere. And what makes me really high on Mississippi State is just how confident and high all of their beat writers are, all of their supporters are. And I know everybody looks through their own team's lenses, their own team's goggles. But I think they would lean towards areas of concern if that were the case. But these beat writers are really, really high on Mississippi State. And many of them had this year circled as their best year to contend in the West when they had Mike Leach. And then it just kind of fell off a little bit whenever they had the huge coaching turnover this offseason. So I think they're going to be one of the surprise teams of the SEC, along with maybe a Kentucky on the east side of things. But I think Mississippi State is poised to have a really, really good year. Now, rounding out the top 3, I actually have a tie with 2 and 3 by record. My bias is going to show here. I do think A&M beats Bama at home this year. So I have A&M finishing 2 and Bama finishing 3. I think Bama slips up twice within conference play this year. I think A&M also slips up twice within conference play this year. But I think A&M beats Bama at home in a crazy atmosphere. The schedule lines up to where A&M could possibly be undefeated going into that game. And I don't know if Bama's going to be undefeated going into that game because they play Texas, obviously, in week 2. And there's no guarantee they win that game or their first couple conference games, though I think they will win their first couple of conference games. That Texas game is a huge toss-up in my mind, so who knows where Alabama is at by the time they come into College Station. I just think A&M is in a good spot to get revenge on last year, to exploit kind of where Alabama's weaker, and that's going to be in the passing department, where A&M should have a much improved run-stop defense. So I have this thing finishing out with a tie between 2 and 3 with Texas A&M getting the tiebreaker. And I have LSU with only 1 conference loss on the year, going 11-1 on the season. So much consistency within this team. Brian Kelly, obviously way ahead of schedule in year 1. Both of the coordinators are back. Most of the important pieces on this team are back, especially in that front 7 on defense. Quarterback, they have some good receivers, good tight end. This is going to be a really damn good team, and I see them kind of tearing their way through their schedule this year with only 1 loss. So this is how I think it shakes out at this point in the season. That's before we see any teams play. What do you guys think about this list? I mean, it's very conceivable that 6 through 4 can shake out in all different sorts of ways. I could see Ole Miss finishing 4th, Mississippi State dropping a couple pegs. Arkansas could surprise a bunch of teams. Depends on how some of those transfers go. They kind of really utilize that transfer portal. They're excited about a young linebacker who's going to be taking the place of those 2 mainstays they've had for the last year and longer. So they should have a good way to make up for that loss. It's that secondary. It's those receivers that really scare me with Arkansas. Bama, obviously, with a lot of quarterback question marks going into the year. Offensive question marks, no huge playmakers at receivers. I do think that their O-line is the saving grace on the team. That O-line will give the other skill positions time to get up to speed. They have so much talent, so much size on that line. It should be the best O-line they've had in a few years. A&M, obviously, I think, is going to improve and maybe double their win total from 5 to 10. Rare that you can say that in this sport, but I think A&M has the troops, the coaching to do it, because I do think the Bobby Petrino thing works out. Then LSU is just going to be on top. So, guys, give me any disagreements, agreements that you might have, any notes. And are you sad that divisions are going away? I'm going to miss playing some of these teams. I love playing LSU, Arkansas. I like playing the Mississippi schools, even though A&M sucks against them. I'm not going to miss playing Auburn because they're like a weird magical team. So don't be surprised if they're higher than 7 because crazy things happen in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Crazy things happen with that program. Anything could happen. It's the best conference in football yet again, I think, and it's wide open. So it's going to be a fun year. But guys, if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. It helps me greatly. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Thanks, and have a good one.